Morning Tri-Cities. It's Friday at 9 a.m. and it's time for Coffee with Karl. I'm Karl Dye from TRIDEC, and today we've got a great group of guests for you, as well as a special co-host today. I'll start off with David Reeploeg from TRIDEC. David's our Vice President of Federal Programs. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
And today's topic, we're going to be talking about the Washington Legislature and see if we can move on, have time for even federal issues. And so I'll start with Jason Herbert from Energy Northwest. Jason is the Director of Government Affairs and Member Relations, and also the Chair of the TriCities Legislative Council. So that's a big mouthful, but good morning, Jason.
Thanks for having me, Karl and David. Good to see you guys.
You bet. Good to see you too. Last but not least, and we should have started first with her, Stephanie Swanberg is the Government and Regional Affairs Director for TriCities Regional Chamber of Commerce, and she's really a lot of the horsepower behind the Legislative Council. So good morning, Stephanie.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Karl.
You bet. Thanks for joining us this morning. For our guests on the webinar today, we'll be using the question and answer feature. If you have any questions, we'll use that feature. If you're on social media and you want to ask a question, if you put it in the comment section, we'll do our best to get to all of our questions this morning. So first thing on Coffee with Karl, we talk about coffee or mugs. And so I'm pretty, generic, boring, but I got my Starbucks Washington mug that had the state series, and we had it before we moved to Washington, but we're talking about Washington Legislature here. I think the mug's a good reminder of kind of like, I think legislative and overall where we are as a state, right? Because it's got like everything on it that's from Western Washington, like, fish and ferries and everything that's kind of Western related. There's only an apple from Eastern Washington. So I think that's, in general, kind of the way that things, I think outside people view Washington. How's that?
Sounds about
we
right.
know different, but a lot of times we get kind of caught up in that. So let's go to Stephanie now. Stephanie, what's your mug or coffee or anything else you're drinking this morning?
Oh, right. Okay. So not so much the mug, but what's inside the mug. Okay. So
Yes.
wait a sec. Wait for it.
Uh-oh.
Okay. So have you guys ever had that peppermint hot cocoa from Costco? Okay. Well,
Oh,
you're lost.
wow.
That's what's in my mug.
As we go through the show, as you drink that and you don't get any whipped cream on your face, I'll be a little bit disappointed. I just got to say.
No promises.
Jason, how about you? You got a mug or coffee story this morning? Or whatever you're drinking?
Within the mug is, roasters. I wanted to support local businesses here this morning. My mug is my Switzerland mug that I went with. Happens to be my favorite. Got it about 8 years ago on a trip with my wife, BC, before kids, before children there. And my dad had like almost the identical mug growing up. He went to high school for 4 years in Switzerland, and we went to it in the shop, and I got it and thought it would be pretty neat to have the same one. So the only problem is it's extremely small. It doesn't fit very much coffee in it. So.
Very efficient, much like the Swiss themselves.
Exactly.
And I do have to say, like, when it comes to legislative affairs, we're not necessarily neutral like Switzerland, right?
Mm-mm.
All right, David, what do you got for a mug or coffee story this morning?
I am. I guess I'm jealous of what Stephanie's got over there, because that sounds a lot better than my regular Keurig coffee. But I just have a TRIDEC little travel mug.
Ooh.
I don't even know at what event I picked this up from, but it's a really handy little mug, and it represents TRIDEC. So
Yeah.
I decided to use that today.
It looks, we all have kids. It looks like a Weeble, from back in the day, Weeble's Wobble.
I haven't knocked it down.
Well, if you did, it would come right back up, David.
I have that one too, David. I don't think I've ever used it because my kids like it. Yeah.
That dates you, Karl. That really dates you.
Yeah, it does. It does. Well, it's, I'm coming up on 1 year here, and I think a few people have told me like I can't say I'm the new guy anymore. So I think that's a threshold that I'm about ready to break through. But let's get into TriCities Legislative Council, and I'm going to ask Stephanie if you could kind of like tell us more about the council, who's involved, the history of it a little bit, and then we'll get into some questions this morning.
Sure, no problem. Well, I've only been with the chamber for 3 years, so it it's been around a lot longer than I have. So I think the first bylaws that I saw were in the late 80s. So it has been around a long time, and it's just a group, a council made up of our partners, which are the chambers and TRIDEC and Visit Tri-Cities. So the chambers include the Hispanic Chamber, the Pasco Chamber, the West Richland Chamber, and the Tri-City Regional Chamber. So yeah, and each of those chambers have 2 representatives that sit on the Legislative Council, and they're voting members. And then they're supported by staff from each entity. So I'm staff support for our 2 representatives, and that's what makes up the council. So it just seems like the Legislative Council, and Jason, you can correct me here and chime in, but it seems like it just kind of doing the same thing. And a couple things happened last year and even the year before where I started, bells started going off, and Lori Madsen, my boss, CEO of the chamber, she mentioned to me that somebody had called her from one of the cities and said, "Hey, when is the Ledge Council going to Olympia?" And we were kind of excited. Oh yeah, they want to be involved. And the person said, "Because we don't want to go on the same day that you guys are going." And it's just kind of a head scratcher. And we thought, well, that if that's the feeling of some of our stakeholders, we've got to change this up a little bit. We've got to really create an organization where we all speak with one voice, and that we all come together, and that we know what the other one's doing, and we can support each other where and when we can, and really collaborate. And I felt like Lori instigated my looking into what other organizations do, and what how other people are doing this kind of thing. And I looked at a couple other organizations that were really had this thing down, and I think we could make some small changes. And fortunately, one of the silver linings to come out of COVID was that the Zoom meeting thing happened. And even though there is Zoom fatigue now, I know it really did work for the Ledge Council, because we put together this comprehensive process where the Ledge Council sent out letters to all the stakeholders, meaning cities, counties, ports, PUDs, and the like, and asked them to share with us in a briefing meeting. They only got 10 minutes to present their legislative priorities. And so we scheduled that out all the way from early October through mid-December, at least 1 up to 4 briefings per meeting. And it was so effective. I feel like we've had nothing but great feedback. Our stakeholders have told us over and over how grateful they were that we included them in our planning and in our considerations. They felt, I remember Mayor Gary saying, "Hey, you scratch our back, we'll scratch yours," and so you kind of have this camaraderie and a kind of this collective voice for the Tri-Cities that I think raises all ships, really. So those briefings, I don't know about you, Jason and David, but I have enjoyed those thoroughly. I feel more connected to the community, and I think the community feels more connected to us, and that they're being heard. So, did that cover it?
I think that's exactly right. We had to look for ways to operate differently during COVID. Everyone has. We're going to talk about that later, I'm sure, with the way the state legislature is operating this year. And going back to the original question, so I always remember Tri-City Legislative Council was founded in 1986, because so was I. So it's an easy date for me to remember. And really, the original mission of it was to speak with one voice on behalf of the Tri-Cities on kind of the big issues affecting the Tri-Cities. And really now it's 4 cities with West Richland, 2 counties across 3 different legislative districts. So there's a lot of diversity there and disparity. And so this group is meant to be the one where we can funnel everything and get our message across the mountain to legislators in Olympia. And I think this year has been a really good opportunity to kind of reset, reevaluate, and figure out how we can do that best. And it's been extremely successful. And I want to say everyone on the board and the staff all pretty much volunteer their time to do this. And we had an arduous schedule throughout the fall. As Stephanie said, it was extremely beneficial, really paid off. And I think it influenced the work we did in a way and that we haven't had before, and also really strengthened our relationships with key stakeholders and groups in the community. So I just want to applaud everyone that's on the Ledge Council board for all the time and effort they put into it this year.
And I think one of the big values, and Jason kind of alluded to it, but I think we have some very dedicated legislators who represent the 3 districts around here, and they've been great and very effective. But what the Legislative Council does is essentially gives them a tool to enable them to advocate most effectively on behalf of the Tri-Cities by doing that culling of all the information and boiling it down to this one document with the community's priorities for the legislature. And that's, I think, allows our voices to be heard more clearly, and it helps them do their job more effectively. So it's been, I think, a really great process.
Yeah, totally. Thank you guys for that overview and kind of the history leading up to the process for this year. Jason, you want to just run down the top priorities for Ledge Council and maybe give a little briefing update, and of course everybody pitch in as we go through this. You want to kick us off there, Jason?
Yeah, sure. I'll probably have Stephanie jump in on a couple of these that she's more the lead expert on. But so I'd say we held over 24 of those meetings and briefings this year, and I'd say 75 to 80% of them, the top issue was rural broadband. I think the COVID, the way that we've had to change how our lives work, working from home, learning from home, has really shown a light on the inequity that rural communities face when it comes to access to reliable internet and broadband services. And so that was really our top issue this year, was advocating for changes in law at the state legislature, as well as additional funding to really build out rural broadband across the state so that everyone has equal access and opportunity to essentially what is the main 21st century tool for business as well as education. And we heard a lot of stories, especially from areas in Pasco and others, where they set up hotspots at libraries. Parents were taking their kids to parking lots to use Wi-Fi from businesses there. That shouldn't happen. And so we're really encouraging the legislature to make some changes there so that the rest of the state, and especially the rural areas, are all pretty much on a level playing field when it comes to education, especially.
Jason, let me chime in and just say I experienced that personally because my kids are distance learning. And if we're all on Zoom at the same time, it doesn't work. And so if I'm having that problem, then I know there's others that do as well. And I went to visit a business in downtown Pasco about a month ago, and the child was in that business with the business owner, and that was the only place they could get Wi-Fi. So there's a child trying to go to school from their parents' place of business, and things have got to improve. It's a crisis.
I think there are enough challenges during COVID, especially as being a parent and trying to teach your kids from home. This should be one issue that we don't have, and hopefully that the legislature will address this year. And I'm hopeful that since many of the legislators will be remoting in from rural areas, and we've already seen some issues with Zoom and reliability and people getting kicked off, that will really make them aware of how big of an issue this is. So I guess another silver lining of COVID there that we'll see. We had 7 main issues. Rural broadband was the top one. Transportation infrastructure, always a big issue for us. That was our second one. We're now the 4th largest metro area in the state. We've seen tremendous growth here, but our transportation needs and infrastructure need to keep up. This means both, funding for new projects, bridges, roadways, but also to maintain and improve our existing infrastructure. And so we've really advocated for funding of those projects going forward as well. Economic development financing is always one. Over the past 2 decades, we've seen tremendous economic and population growth in the Tri-Cities. We now have over 300,000 people in this area right now. And we need to be able to maintain this growth. And so there are a lot of tools like the Local Revitalization Fund, LRF, that has been extremely useful, TIF financing, tax increment financing, community economic Revitalization Board, CURB, as well as .09 funds, the rural county tax rebates. So we've encouraged the legislature to continue all those programs and fund them at adequate levels. And that will really allow us to continue to grow and build on the past 2 decades of work. And then, I'll let Stephanie talk a little bit about higher ed if you want to, since that's, I think, an area.
Sure. I feel like from our stakeholders, especially we had the superintendents come in and give us briefings on this, which was really great. And we also had Rebecca Wood, Sandra Haynes, Chancellor Haynes, I should say, from CBC and WSU TriCities. And boy, they're doing great work. And I remember Chancellor Haynes coming in and saying during the briefing, she said, we don't want to ask for a lot. We know that this is a really tough time, but she just wanted to thank the state for maintaining funding for higher education, and just wanted to ask that stay a level playing field and just maintain that funding. And so they're not going for anything big this year, and the Legislative Council agreed that just to maintain that funding and keep going. With K through 12, it was also just applauds the efforts of the state legislature in funding the McCleary obligation, and wanted to continue that as well. I mean, there's some specific asks, but education right now is so important, and everybody is struggling with these issues, and the superintendents and our higher ed admin are really doing a phenomenal job at pivoting during this time. So yeah, we support them fully.
And then a couple of the other issues that were our priorities: clean energy and protecting the lower Snake River dams. Protecting the lower Snake River dams has been a huge priority for a long time here. Those really are the lifeblood and the backbone of central and eastern Washington, as well as Idaho and Oregon. Providing huge amounts of reliable, renewable electricity, as well as transportation benefits, irrigation, but also, the legislature adopted the Clean Energy Transformation Act in 2019, setting us on the path to 100% clean energy by 2045. And Northwest Power and Conservation Council on their website has a great graph of where all the electricity is generated in the state of Washington, and about 80% of it's generated east of the Cascades. And so the point I always make is, any of these changes that happen in the state legislature, they're going to be on the backs of central and eastern Washington. Like, we're going to be the ones responsible for providing this energy for the rest of the state and the major population areas west of the Cascades. And so we really want to advocate, a technology neutral approach that allows for things like hydropower and nuclear to work with renewables and make sure that we maintain a reliable and affordable electric system. And so, we have the opportunity for some advanced nuclear reactors here in the Tri-Cities that we're very excited about, with my Energy Northwest hat on. We have Columbia Generating Station, a lot of hydropower, a lot of renewables, and we're already 97% clean in the Tri-Cities. We're one of the, if not the cleanest communities, one of them in the state of Washington. So that's one of our real priorities.
Can I chime in and just say, I had someone the other day ask me what technology neutral meant. And so sometimes you guys, you Energy Northwest peeps, talk about things that general public doesn't really understand what you're referring to when you say technology neutral. Could you explain that just a little bit for me? Yeah.
So technology neutral means, in another way, I guess, a kind of phrase that I think gets thrown around too much, but don't pick winners and losers. If the state wants to say that you need to use only carbon-free resources by 2045, that's fine. But don't specify that you have to use X amount of wind or X amount of solar, that you can't use nuclear, that you have to decrease hydropower by 10%. Essentially, allow the market to choose which clean energy resources they want to use. So be neutral when it comes to which technologies you can utilize to meet the goals in the future. That's pretty much what it means, is keep your options open. And then so the last two that I'll go on, the first one, tourism. So this has been a big one. The tourism industry has seen a 45% decrease in revenue as a result of COVID. I think they, along with the restaurant industry, have been hit about as hard as anybody could be by this. And so really encouraging the state to provide funding and support to those industries has been one of our priorities. And then the last one was taxes and spending, which I think is one I turn over to Stephanie to talk about a little bit more.
Well, this is probably one that Karl and David could speak to really well too, is that, you know, we have to support a tax climate that is good for economic development. And it's just critical, especially at this time during this crisis, really this economic crisis, to be in a position where businesses want to come here. We've got to be able to be that state and that region that attracts new business in order to lift us above and beyond, you know, what's happening out in the area and the economy that that is supported by that. So really, tax increases should be looked at with that, you know, with those glasses on, with that microscope. And you know, we've had just yesterday 5096. The capital gains tax. There was a public hearing on that. I tried to get in to testify, but I think the queue was just too long and I didn't make the cut. So, but those kind of things we really need to take a look at. We want to make sure that businesses still feel good about coming into our region and know that they're going to have a good, fair taxation system in place.
Yeah, if I could add on to that too, you know, one of the things that we've seen over this year and we've seen last year, maybe the year before, is that, you know, this idea of a capital gains tax, which the IRS defines as an income tax. And as someone who went to school in Texas, lived in Texas for a number of years, you know, you've seen the growth that these states without income taxes have, and with really equitable tax policies attracting a lot of investment and companies to come from places like California and others that are very high tax areas. And so I think one of the big selling points for Washington State has been the fact that we don't have a state income tax. And so some of these efforts I know would raise revenue, but would have ultimately, we think in a long term, a detrimental impact on revenue by scaring away new business and economic development.
I think that's a great point, especially, you know, when we're talking about companies coming in, is you know, they look at each state, you know, what is your tax policy, and that's a big part of the financial decision that they have to make. And I think overall, you know, I've talked about the East-West, we've talked about East-West, and it's something that always comes up in the legislature. But a lot of times, you know, some of these bills seem to be coming out of a view of like, well, we're going to keep on growing no matter what. You know, there's always going to be an Amazon and Boeing will come back, and, you know, whatever kind of West Side specific companies and industries and examples are. And so it seems like there's a, you know, there are people that are trying to say, okay, well, let's just tax them, or let's tax the higher earners and stuff. And then I think the split is on the East side, we don't have that. You know, we are constantly trying to diversify our economy. We are constantly trying to bring those companies in. And so we need tax policy, to your point, that's going to allow us to do that. And it really is different based on the part of the state that you're in. But I think that's a very unifying thing for Eastern Washington, where, would you say, Jason, 80% of the power comes from for the state. So it's this, you know, this situation that we have in the state. But tax policy is huge. I think especially with COVID, right? I mean, companies are either struggling, dying off, or surviving. And I think the last thing that we want to do is set up a new tax policy that's going to impact business that makes it harder to recover from COVID.
Well, and I think we talk a lot about COVID. You know, we're seeing a lot of businesses make decisions on where their headquarters are going to be, moving employees out of places like San Francisco that are hugely expensive to live, where you have to pay a much higher salary to employees. And so as this continues on and we see these kind of shifts, Tesla moving to Texas, you know, things like that from California, Washington should stay as competitive as possible, and especially Central and Eastern Washington, to try to attract these things. And so doing things like a capital gains tax, I think, is counterproductive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say too that, yeah, I think it's hard to overstate the importance of that. A lot of times when we're talking to companies, you know, they're shopping all over the country, and we have some unique competitive advantages right now that, and we have some challenges too. But keeping that in mind as we try to figure out how we're going to pay for what we need to pay for, I think is going to be really important. But maintaining that, what advantages we have, I think is going to be critical. And I wanted to ask, kind of shifting gears, but Stephanie, you mentioned the effort to try to testify yesterday. And so I'm hoping that either you or Jason can share a little bit about how the state legislature is working this year in session remotely, and what's different this year than last year, and if folks want to be involved and engaged. In some respects, I think that this makes it a lot easier for folks who live some distance away from Olympia to be involved, but I think they're still kind of figuring out how to make it all work. So any information you can share or suggestions would be great.
Sure. Well, I guess to start, just to talk about how it used to be, we used to have to drive over the mountains to testify in a hearing. So again, this is a new development because of COVID that has actually been an opportunity for us here in the Tri-Cities to get more involved. And so there's also issues with this technology, obviously. There was issues yesterday. If you guys have watched any of the hearings, it's kind of funny. The green screen makes the chair look like he's just a floating head. It's so funny. But so maybe they could do something about that. But if you want to register to be involved and testify at a public hearing, you just go to ledge.wa.gov and you hit, you just click on, I think it's bill information, or I would need to look at that site, but you just click on registration. Either you can register, you have to know the committee name, and you need to know if it's in the Senate or the House, and you also should know the bill number as well. So if you know what you want, go in there, put in the information, you sign up, and then they send you an individual link to testify as Zoom link, and you just click on that when they call your name, and you should leave your video and audio on, because if they call your name and you're not ready to rock and roll with that testimony, they move on to the next one. So and then I didn't get a chance to yesterday because I think there was just too many people. The chairs have an opportunity to limit how long you can speak, and how much public testimony they're going to take. Maybe a chair, due to time constraints, may be able to only take 5 opposed and 5 in support, pro and con kind of thing, where they take an equal amount from both sides of the issue. It just depends on the chair of the committee and how and what they're faced with as far as scheduling. I think they were allowing 2 to 3 minutes yesterday at the public hearing that I was listening to, and they went through about half of the list of those that had signed up to testify. Like I said, I didn't make the cut, but you are allowed, or you have the opportunity to submit written testimony. And I tried to do that, but there was something wrong with the link. So I think there's still some kinks they're trying to work out, and still a few glitches here and there. And I think, with this first week under their belt, they've learned a lot. And I think we'll come back next week with some improvements probably.
To follow up on that, I think, as you said in previous years, not only to testify, but if you wanted to do any advocacy on an issue, you'd oftentimes just have to make the trip over to Olympia. Again, since that's not an option, do we know yet with the technology glitches and snafus, but what's the best way for people to do that advocacy? If you wanted to try to engage with a legislator or a committee staff or whatever it might be, instead of making the drive over and having those conversations face to face, how do people do that now?
I think that's still being figured out a little bit. Usually, as anyone that's gone over to Olympia with one of our trips or just on other trips knows, a lot of what happens there is just running into legislators in the cafeteria or popping by their office, talking to their legislative assistants. So I know that there's been a lot of frustration among, like the professional lobbying and government affairs class that you don't have that access anymore. So, one of the main ways I guess is just reaching out by email, trying to get creative, send along videos, short PDF documents, things like that, set up Zoom meetings. But the legislators, their schedules are pretty crazy. I think right now, as Stephanie talked about, one of the best ways is to sign in and testify at hearings. To kind of support how this is, another silver lining, I guess, for us with COVID is in the past, let's say when we had a climate hearing in Olympia, about half the room that was there to testify would be people from industry, environmental groups, others, they're lobbyists. But then you'd also have half the people who were just normal, everyday people speaking for themselves, but usually from the west side, near Olympia, Seattle, Tacoma, somewhere, Vancouver, somewhere where they could drive in. And they would come in and give really impassioned testimony on these things, whereas people from Central and Eastern Washington weren't driving over. Because it's a big ask, especially when the passes might be closed and all that. But the other thing too is you can sign in when you testify in support or in opposition to a bill. But previously, before COVID, you had to be there in person to sign in at that hearing. Now you can do that online through Zoom meetings. So really anyone that's out here and wants to get involved, they have that opportunity now without having to make, a 4-hour drive across the mountains. So I think that's a huge advantage for us as far as having our voices heard outside of the traditional, kind of lobbyists and people that are paid to be there on our behalf.
Jason, can I just add that we did used to have to drive over the mountains, but a big, huge shout out to CBC and the work of Jason Mercier at the Washington Policy Center. They did have remote testimony from CBC. So that has been available in the past. It's just been really expanded now. You can testify from your armchair in your living room now. So great work on their part, and they paved the way for this to be able to be available to us now.
Oh, that's great. And Stephanie, I did want to highlight that you have started a YouTube channel called Session Spotlight, and I know Tracy put it in the chat. So if anybody's interested there, you want to just give us a overview of what you're doing with that, or what the scope is?
Well, it's just really short. Basically, I'm just going to highlight bills that are looking at action that the chamber is keeping an eye on, because it's extremely business focused. So we're really not going to go outside the bounds of what our business community wants to hear about and know about, and things that are happening that could affect them. So yeah, we're keeping an eye on legislation and kind of spotlighting those bills that and what's happening on those bills, how they're moving, if there's public hearings and when. So if that's something that you do want to get involved with, watch Session Spotlight and see what the what bills we're highlighting, and see how, if there's an area that you're passionate about that you want to get involved with. We'll let you know when the hearing is on those bills.
That's great. I think that's a great service for your members and for the business community in general. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Jason, you want to give us, in your daytime job outside of the Ledge Council and stuff, obviously you're very involved in, both federal and state policy and legislative sessions. But what's your take on this legislative session? Like, what do you, outside of our, TriCities Legislative Council top priorities, what do you see are the main issues or the main policy things that are kind of going to come through the legislature this year? And even we can get into predictions if we want to.
I want, for me in my other role, and I think the biggest thing that we're going to see is additional efforts around climate and carbon, a cap and invest program, which is essentially cap and trade. So as we talked about, we did the Clean Energy Transformation Act in 2019, which applied pretty solely to the electric sector. This would be economy-wide and really look at decarbonizing the transportation sector over the coming decades, as would a low-carbon fuel standard that we're expecting to see. Also, looking like there will be a lot of revenue-raising bills. We talked about capital gains, getting hearings already. We are seeing some movement on broadband. I think we'll see a lot of efforts around coronavirus relief and distributing CARES funding that came through the federal government, as well as any other funding that comes in future stimulus bills from the federal government to the state legislature. But one of the big things that Democratic leaders have said is that their focus is really going to be, on education and addressing poverty and access to healthcare. So I would imagine we'll see a lot around that. As far as predictions go, this is such an unprecedented year. It's hard enough to get stuff through the legislature, even in a long session as it is, and make predictions. So I wouldn't hazard any at this point, but I can tell you those are the things that we're really expecting to be kind of the top priorities early on. And by mid-February, we should have a better idea of what's going to kind of take up the second half of the session. It's a 105-day session, so we have some time left.
Yeah. So on your when you said there are a number of bills that are looking at raising revenue, is the thought being that you raise revenue because they need more funding for programs that help, poverty and equity, things like that? Because I think the projections are, which are totally different from when we first went into COVID, that actually the state revenues based on, I think, the biennial budget were going to come in and match up, and maybe there's even a projected surplus right now. Is that kind of the thought behind, hey, we need these income revenue generators because they want to fund other government programs to kind of focus on those areas?
Yeah, that's my understanding as to what it would be. And that's, talking about something like cap and invest, that's been a big concern from our standpoint and from the utility industry, of making sure that any revenue that's generated is given back to the communities, back to the public utility districts and others to make investments in electric vehicle fleets and things like that, rather than having that money just go into the general fund. Because essentially then you get ratepayers, customers are getting taxed double. Their rates are going to go up because of this, and then they're essentially going to be paying to meet these new requirements by doing things like electric vehicles, electric trash trucks, and buses, and everything else. So that's one of our concerns. Is we always call it revenue recycling, which means the revenue that's generated from the industry should go back to that industry to be reinvested in what's needed to meet the mandates from the state.
Totally. Stephanie, any predictions or anything to add on what do you see coming out of this session? I know I was going to highlight transportation because obviously that's one of our top issues from Ledge Council, but is it Representative Fye, had a number of, quite a few throughout the state, like Zoom meetings. I think here in the TriCities, I was a part of or got invited to maybe 4 or 5 different ones that were from different groups. I know they took a lot of input on that transportation. So obviously, and I think it relates to some of the carbon things that Jason was talking about, but got any projections, or what do you think is going to come out of this session?
Well, Senator Hobbs, I think that there is a lot of in-party communication that still needs to happen, and they need to work together and put together a package that that everyone can live with, and that's way easier said than done. The revenue stream for that, whatever it is, it has to go straight to transportation. The 18th Amendment needs to be applied. It has to go to transportation, and or else it's just, I'll pivot for just a second and say that we just did, the regional chamber just did a COVID impact survey, and our members are saying we can't take any more taxes. We can't do higher taxes right now. You've got to take our situation into consideration. Over 60% said that they had lost revenue last year, which is, we were expecting the number to be that high, but still 40% said it was significant revenue loss. So we are struggling, we are hurting, and transportation is a priority. Yes, it's just, I guess, ask yourself, what is your stomach for potholes? And what do you, as far as maintenance, what are you willing to live with versus what has to happen for maintenance just to keep the roads drivable? So these things, transportation is a priority for business. it's always been a priority for business. The better our roads and the better able we are to move around product, the better our economy. So it is critically important, but we just are really trying to advocate that they be careful when they're discussing revenue.
Yeah.
Well, on that point, I don't know if either one of you are tracking it specifically, so if not, please disregard. But one of the revenue sources, obviously, for transportation in the past and is today is gas tax. And there's been some efforts to rethink how we're doing that, given the growth in electrical vehicles and more efficient gas engines. And I know they played around with a number of different ideas, but do you know if that's on the table this session as well?
I think everything's on the table this session because something has to give. Even if it doesn't happen this session, it has to happen very, very soon. So, yesterday we just had the hearing on the low carbon fuel standard. How much of that income would go towards transportation? I didn't see the breakdown on that, but yeah, I think everything's on the table right now.
Yep, that's my understanding too.
Well, and I think transportation is a great topic and in one of those kind of listening sessions that transportation committees had in all of them, in fact, that I participated in, they talked about one of the big drivers in where does the dollars go out of state transportation funding. And right now it's to create fish passage with culverts and bridges and stuff, which I think are predominantly on the west side of the state. And I think it's a good example. Like, I wasn't aware of it, but to talk about it like this is something that we have to do for fish recovery. And it's just like our local issue of Lower Snake River dams, right? Like, there's so many things where we're trying to balance things out for, like fish recovery, clean, affordable energy, and tax policy. And you mix all those things together, and that's kind of the sausage making process, I guess, that the legislatures take on every year. That, and again, I don't think there's a lot of understanding of how much money they have to spend for fish passage recovery and, fixing culverts, right? That could be collapsed. They could be too small that fish can't get through them, and they got to do it. So it's just it's a very complex issue, and it's a tough one to challenge because nobody wants to pay more for fuel. If you have an electric car, how are you actually taxed to, make up for the wear and tear you're going to have on the road, which today, if you have a gas vehicle, it's going to be through taxes. So that's a tough one and a big one, which is a big part of the state's funding too.
And culverts are so expensive.
Yeah.
I think to myself, why don't they take that salmon recovery, the money from the salmon recovery office that they want to fully fund at $80 million that works on tearing down the Snake River dams. Instead, let's take that $80 million and put it into culverts.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think all of us look back over the last 2 years and the fund that you're talking about and the money that they spent on the process that basically said, like, this is a really complex issue and there aren't any clear answers. If they took that money and put it in the culvert, that would have been a good move. And of course, I think to get the fish back is a really important issue for everybody. The fish issue on the Lower Snake River dams is one that I think all tributaries of the Columbia and of the Pacific Ocean are facing up and down the West Coast. There's a bigger issue going on science-wise that affects that. But we're down to about 15 minutes. Do you want to kind of just take a little dabble into Washington, D.C. politics? I know it's a very weird, I won't even say the unprecedented time, but I think just in general with the new Congress in session and the way things are going to shape out. And Jason, you want to talk about maybe any federal issues that you see coming up, or that maybe a direction things might go?
Yeah, it's going to be obviously really interesting. A big changing of the guard at the federal level. So obviously, new administration coming in with President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris. So we're going to have tons of new political appointees across a bunch of agencies. DOE is one especially important to the TriCities, doing a lot of work with Energy Northwest, PNNL, and Hanford, and accounts for over $3 billion in funding that comes into the TriCities every year between Hanford and PNNL. So we're going to keep a close eye on kind of who those assistant secretaries, deputy secretaries, and others are. And when it comes to Congress, obviously the House is still in the control of Democrats, but with a much reduced majority. So right now it's 222 to 211 with 2 seats that still haven't been decided yet. So right now it looks like they'll have a 5-vote majority, which is quite small. The Senate, after the Georgia runoffs, is going to be a 50-50 tie with Vice President-elect Harris as the tiebreaker. So Democrats will control the floor in the Senate. But on such narrow margins, I would say I don't expect anything hugely transformational or controversial to get through. Having worked in Congress for little less than a decade, I can tell you once you get in the majority, then you start to realize how fractioned and how many factions there are within your caucus. When Republicans had the House, we had a really hard time agreeing on a lot of things, even with a huge majority, the largest one we had since Hoover. So working with really small majorities and having someone like Senator Manchin in the Senate, I think is going to, who's a very conservative Democrat from West Virginia, is going to make it very hard for them to, pass anything too far to one end of the political spectrum. So I'd say it's going to be interesting. We'll have budget reconciliation process, which is a hugely technical process, but kind of a one-time opportunity to push through some things like that on simple majority votes. And so we're just going to have to watch it, very closely. And obviously, I think the political situation and divisiveness in the country is going to be something to watch as Congress gets started and a new Biden cabinet and administration is confirmed by the Senate. So it's just going to be an interesting couple of months to see how this all sets up. I think obviously one of the first and foremost actions is going to be COVID relief and trying to get more funding as well as coordination on getting vaccines out and making sure that that work that started on the Trump administration continues into the Biden administration.
And I think it'll be interesting to see. I think we'll have a really good glimpse into the priorities and the perspective of the new Biden administration when we see their FY22 budget request. That'll tell us a lot about where they prioritize things like funding for research and development at the national laboratories or Hanford cleanup or investments in advanced reactors, which are all real high priorities for our community. So, and I think even by that point, we expect that budget will probably come out in late February, March time period. A lot of the political appointees that Jason was just referencing will probably have the cabinet level folks confirmed, at least for the most part by then, but then the deputy secretary level and the undersecretary and assistant secretaries, they largely probably won't be there, especially at agencies like the Department of Energy. So this is a fairly common thing every 4 years or 8 years there's a new administration, but it kind of can get off to a little bit of a slow start. But I think that, I think in the past, federally, where our real budget priorities were Hanford cleanup and PNL, and those will continue to be. But again, with the advanced reactor demonstration program and the opportunities here, that's going to be, I think, come right up level with those as a real top priority for our community. And one of the things I think it's also really important to note is that as a state, we continue to get even better positioned congressionally with the committee memberships and the seniority of our delegation. Starting with the Senate, we have Patty Murray, who is now going to be the chair of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee, a senior member of the Energy and Water Appropriations, now in the majority. Senator Cantwell will be chair of the Commerce Committee, which has very broad jurisdiction on a lot of our priorities. In the House, Congressman Newhouse is becoming more senior, and he's developed some really strong relationships across the aisle on the energy and water appropriations side there. And also on appropriations, we have Derek Kilmer over on in the 6th Congressional District. But then I think really importantly, Kathy McMorris Rogers is going to be the ranking member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee too. And she's, as we all know, she's been a great advocate on the dams. She's been very supportive of nuclear as well. So, and and Kim Schreier, who represents even, to about Ellensburg in Eastern Washington. She's now going to be on the Energy and Commerce Committee as well. So we have a really good mix of, both chambers and both parties of people who are really well positioned, who've have a long track record of supporting our issues, but now I think are going to be even better positioned as they take some of these more leadership roles in the new Congress.
Yeah, and one I would add on there too is Congressman Newhouse also just became the new chair of Congressional Western Caucus, which is not an official committee, but it's a well-funded caucus that has a seat with leadership in the House, and I think it represents about 70 to 80 members right now, and all from across the Western United States, and even some parts of the Eastern United States that are more rural and care about the same issues, like timber, energy, water, and so that will be a very powerful platform for Congressman Newhouse to have as well going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and here specifically in the Tri-Cities, we focus a lot on the Department of Energy, but more broadly in the Central and Eastern Washington region, the Bureau of Reclamation and the water projects and the irrigation projects are incredibly important for us. And in addition to the other agencies that Congressman Newhouse, as chair of the caucus, will kind of have even stronger relationship with, I think especially important might be that Bureau of Reclamation and advocating for some of our irrigation and water needs in the region.
Absolutely.
Great point.
Stephanie, any predictions? I guess, I mean, the federal situation is so out there.
Well, I think that Jason and David covered it really, really well. One thing that Jason said just stood out to me is that, and it jives really closely with what our chamber members want as for us to take on as our top priority. They want us to advocate, according to the survey that we just did. Their number one priority is COVID relief. So we have a job to do. We have got to help businesses recover. We have to make sure that we advocate for relief for small businesses, and that includes, unemployment. That includes small and medium-sized businesses. That includes tax incentives, tax breaks. And so we need to be vigilant at the federal level as well to make sure that they stay informed about what our communities are going through. And so that's what we're trying to do, I know, with all of you as well. So it's our top priority.
Definitely. We're down to 5 minutes. Stephanie, I was going to ask you, you want to give us just a recap? I know through COVID, you've led the Chamber's efforts on the rapid response team, rapid response program.
Sure.
Just give us a snapshot of what you're seeing out there. I mean, give us a little insight into what you're hearing from businesses that are contacting you. Right.
Well, I'll just tell you about a phone call that I received recently. If you can indulge me for a minute on a personal level, there's a woman who is a single mother, family of 5, and she's the owner of banquet halls in downtown Pasco that they rent out and do the food for these banquets for quinceañeras and for weddings. And it really is the heart of downtown Pasco. They are booked every single weekend, and that is no joke. That they run that thing all year long, and every weekend it's completely booked out, and you have to book it out for months in advance to get in, and it's very, very well used, and they were doing very well. And with COVID and the shutdowns, they can't pay their bills. They can't. The bills are coming and they're not able to pay them. And this is a reality. And PPP has helped with their employees, and a grant has helped just keep a roof over their head for the time being, but they're looking at selling their property potentially and having to close down permanently. And you see things like that, and then to even consider a capital gains, that's just insult to injury. Even though I I think there's an exemption for businesses like that, but still, it's a slippery slope once you start things like that. So we need to be in touch. We need to keep our ears to the ground and know intimately what's happening with the businesses in this community and how greatly they're suffering, and that they're taking it one day at a time. And part of this survey response also, you'll be interested to know that the majority of those that took the survey responded that it would take them over a year, even if the economy went back to normal today, it would take them well over a year to recover. So things are going to potentially get worse before they get better, and we need to make sure that they have the support they need to stay open and survive. So the one thing that the chamber does, we have a rapid response call line where businesses can call in and say, hey, what resources are out there for me and my specific needs? And what I'll do when I answer those calls is I'll just go through the resource guide, which I update every week with new resources, whether it be webinars on how to take your business online, or whether it's information on grants out there for women-owned businesses or veteran-owned businesses, or whatever the case may be. I try to stay on top of all the grants and all the resources that could potentially help businesses get through this time. And then I individualize that and say, okay, well, these resources would apply to you and your business. And then I email those out to them. And I think that's been, people are utilizing that, and they're very grateful. And the resource guide is posted up on our website as well. So those are just two things that we're doing, and that we're trying to help businesses. We also, like you, Karl, did a grant to help businesses in need as well, and that was very successful. And we allocated $600,000 in grant funds for businesses in greatest need. We had over 1.7 million that was asked, and so over half of those people that applied, we weren't able to help. But we're hoping that more funds are coming and that we can do some more good. And I'm sure you guys are hoping to do the same.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I appreciate that overview. I think that kind of sums up our conversation today, because both federally and at state level, there's obviously a lot of conversations going on about, future COVID relief and trying to bring businesses back. And that's definitely, I think, going to be a big push in the first 100 days of the new administration, as we talked about. So we're coming up on 9:59. Really appreciate your guys' time. I think this is a good conversation, and I'm still claiming the new guy title. So I'll just say, the work that everybody's done together on TriCities Ledge Council, I think is awesome. And I think that is so important for all of us to think about. Even though our name is TriCities, when we're really quad cities, we all represent so many different entities, but to speak with that one voice legislatively, I think just really magnifies our ability to get things done in Olympia, and to bring the right policies and programs back for our businesses and for our communities. So you guys want to maybe make a closing statement, and we'll start with Jason. Jason, thanks for your time today.
Hey, thanks. It's been great to be here and to have coffee with other adults for the first time in a while. I'm enjoying that. I guess closing up, I just want to thank Stephanie, Liz Renz at the Regional Chamber, David Reeploeg, Tiffany, Hector at Visit TriCities, as well as all of the board members on Ledge Council. It's been a busy fall and a busy winter as well, and it'll continue throughout the spring. So everyone's spent a lot of time, and we really appreciate it. And the last thing I'll say is, I think everyone saw that our CEO, Brad Sawatsky, who's been an amazing leader for our company, announced that he's going to retire in June. I know he's on TRIDEC's board, and so I just want to say that we're really going to miss him, and he's been such a great force with all of his energy in the community.
Totally, and thanks for bringing that up, Jason. Brad's an amazing leader. I mean, I've just gotten to know him a little bit. Huge shoes to fill, and has done so many amazing things for Energy Northwest and for the community. So thanks to Brad for his service to our community. Stephanie, thanks for coming on this morning. Do you have any closing remarks?
Well, I think Jason did a great job of wrapping up and thanking people, but the one person he failed to thank was himself. Why didn't you thank yourself, Jason? He's been a tremendous leader on the Ledge Council. Just absolutely tremendous work from Jason, leading us and getting things organized and being willing to stretch outside the bounds of what is normal and being willing to experiment with that and really running with it. And I just think. Thank you so much, Jason, for all your work and effort. It's been a pleasure working with you.
Happy to do it.
And I would echo that too. For folks who aren't familiar, the Legislative Council, the chair rotates between organizations every 2 years. And so Jason will hopefully continue to serve as TRIDEC one of TRIDEC's representatives on the Legislative Council. But he served as chair for the last 2 years. And I guess we're nearing the end of his chairmanship, but he's
third year.
Third year.
I'm my third term. It's 1 year term.
You're doing such a good job. You just keep on rolling, you know.
So maybe you're not off the hook yet. I don't know. We'll see.
We roped him into that one, David, didn't we?
But yeah, I mean, especially since that's kind of outside of your day job, we really appreciate all the time and investment and leadership that you've had, and then Stephanie, I think you're such an asset to your knowledge and engagement and kind of guiding these efforts over the years have been very helpful too. So I think we got a great team of people guiding this and sharing the TriCities priorities.
Well said, David. Well, thanks everybody for joining us this morning, and we really appreciate your time and your work with the Ledge Council. So we'll definitely be in touch, and we've got some resources out there to track what's going on, and we'll keep on giving it all for this legislative session. Thanks, you guys. Have a good weekend.
See you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.